Hello, Maxine. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics of light posting, give you a little bit of feedback, observations, and so on. So let's jump right into it. Check out your posting. So there it is. All right. So we'll take a look at the overall posting at first, see you have everything in order. There's direction, intensity, temperature, got it all in color, looks good. So what I'm doing is just basically looking to see that you've got everything kind of up there, organized the way that we wanted you to organize them, stuff like that. Seems like it would be, pretty straightforward to be able to do that, but not everybody is really paying attention to those things. And that can really be a big separator between people in terms of just being able to put together the posting. So looks like you didn't have any trouble there. So let's kind of go over and see what we have here. So direction, of course, is the first and probably the most important of all of the characteristics, because what direction does is it establishes that key light, the main light source in the scene. And what it does is it establishes, in some ways, time of day, it establishes mood, it establishes an emotive quality. And so without it, you have just this overall general sort of wash. If there's no sense of direction to the light, it's just really all about information. We do directionless light when we're trying to simply um, illuminate something, where we're just trying to describe something. For instance, if we were doing like a painting and we wanted to do like a copy of that painting, just kind of record what the painting looks like, to do like a slide of it, we would do just a general overall directionless lighting, right? We wouldn't want lighting that looks like it was coming from a direction. The lighting that's on me right now, very much a wash. I'm, in a large room right now. And so there really isn't a sense of where I am. So there's not a whole lot of mood to the lighting that's on me. That's not what we're looking for when we're attempting to communicate through photography. So taking a look at what you're doing, it looks like you have a pretty good sense just in terms of the technique of using a single light and moving them around. What I do really appreciate pretty much in all of the stuff that you're working on here is that you have taken the idea of using the entire picture plane or the entire frame here at heart. In other words, you're not being shy about allowing things to just sort of take up the entire picture plane. It's clear that you're not looking at bottles here. Or vases or anything like that. And that really, I think, is separating these images from a lot of the images that we're seeing from your peers and from others. So this is a really good job, and hopefully it's serving as an example to some of the other students as they can see what's going on. Simple things like right in here, this becomes an altogether a different thing. It becomes a shape. It's not just an element here and its shadow. It transforms itself into things other than itself. Textures, shape, repetition, all of those things. The subtle sort of interplay between values and tones starts to happen. Again, this is what we're looking for. We're looking to sort of activate the space. Now, if you had something, for instance, like a label, if this was, let's say, a graphic sort of advertisement, if there were, for instance, labels, or there was something else that was meant to be a highlight in there, this would be very effective, because what you would be doing is establishing a mood, an atmosphere, and then the next step would be to add in the very specific subject that that would be going for, that you would be going to try to highlight here. In some cases, the image, the shutter, the exposure gets a little bit soft here, where we're getting, meaning gets a little bit muddy, where we're getting overall sort of gray tones here. We're lacking a little bit of luminosity, whereas you can see here with some of the other lighting directions, you're getting a more of a value range from light to dark. It's not really a judgment call. It's really just an observation that here it's a much more I would say low key looking scene, as opposed to something like this, which is a much more broad dynamic range. You do lose quite a bit of information in the shadows, but this is something that we wind up addressing later on, of course, in some of the others. So, you know, a really good, I think you're doing a really good job here with the basic overall here. Stuff like this, you do have to be sort of aware of, kind of be careful of having elements that are very high key, very bright, right on the edge there. You can see here as I back out again, right in here next to the white, it's almost as if it just dissolves away. That can be problematic, especially if you're using imagery in a complementary design, if you're using it incorporated in a design. If this were to be printed, those types of things, we would kind of have a little bit of a problem there, because this would conflict, or this would start to feel like it's bleeding off to the edge. So we want to be careful of that. Also be careful of the edges being completely and totally black on the outside. So these are some subtle things that you want to kind of be aware of, that I guess once we get into editing, which we don't do in this class, but when you get into the editing, which would be the logical next step to something like this, you would start to subtly massage some of these values and tones as you go. Now, intensity, what this does is it brings you to the next step, of course. So you have the direction, but then intensity, what it does is it should help you to start to add in a little bit of more value to the shadow areas and kind of get control of those a bit more. This is actually adding another light, and so you tend to be able to sort of create that new sense. What is difficult is that, whoops, somehow my control is kind of getting out of hand. Sometimes what it does do is it adds the complexity of a second shadow direction, but I think you're doing a very good job here by not including the ground surface on the intensity here. You're sort of addressing it at a kind of an even plane here. You're not including the floor, basically. And what that's doing is it's helping you. It's helping you to avoid the cross shadow effect that you get when you have multiple light sources. Multiple light sources can be a problem in that, because you get this sort of difficult look. You are getting this kind of what we call the butterfly effect here, where you have the light here and you have also the light source here. You want to be careful of that. It only happens really on this surface, a little bit over here. This is where the lighting is starting to get a little bit too even, where the key light and the fill light are getting kind of close to one another. You really want the fill light to be pretty subtle. The fill light needs to be really much lower in intensity. It's really just meant to be this sort of accent. If it starts to compete with the key light, the way that this is kind of doing, it's almost creating a balance. You can get this sort of butterfly look where you've got this center line and then this flaring of light on either side like this. That's called a butterfly look. You want to kind of avoid that in most cases. Let's jump on to your temperature. Now, temperature, of course, we started to incorporate the bones into this, getting a little bit more texture, a little more color, a little more tone. This is where we usually see, in a lot of cases, the compositions start to kind of fall off a little bit. What I mean by compositions falling off a little bit is the compositions tend to feel a little less composed, or like a little less attention is being paid, but it doesn't seem that way for you here. We have a few things here that I might consider, and they're minor. And to tell you the truth, you may not have even seen this in your view frame. This area right in here, where the element kind of comes right up and touches here, that is, I call these little things like collisions, where you're colliding with the edge of your composition. We want to avoid that. We would want to either have it completely within the frame, or allowing the frame to sort of cut off at a certain point there, so that it doesn't create this area of tension. Now, I say you probably didn't even see that, because in a lot of cases on cameras, unless they are a very sort of a high-end professional viewfinder, you're only going to see a certain percentage of what the actual sensor is collecting. And so you might be only seeing maybe 90 or 95% of the actual collected frame. So you might not have even been aware that you were collecting this much of it in the end. And so those things can sometimes be pretty minor. You can see basically, though, once we move into color, once we move into color, how the overall contrast range, or how the overall variations of light to dark sort of shift a little bit, because now you're working with color contrast, which is a different thing than working with tonal contrast. Tonal contrast is much different than color contrast, because with color contrast you have these sort of luminescent qualities that you're trying to work with that aren't quite the same. So you have, generally in these images, I would say that the dynamic range is much lower than in your initial images here with the first two, where the dynamic range seems to be much broader. We have this sort of value range from very light going into the very dark. When you get into the color, suddenly it starts to appear that the dynamic range lowers, and that the images look, I don't want to say flat, but they look much more soft in terms of the dynamic range. You're still doing a very good job of addressing the entire picture plane. You're focusing on one element. You're allowing some of the other elements to fall off using a shallow depth of field. Whether you're aware of that or not, I'm not sure. But you're inadvertently, if that's the case, doing a very shallow depth of field, coming in and very close on these things, which presumably is your instinct to do that, is just a really good instinct, because these kinds of things allow you to circumvent the subject itself and get really into it. I also appreciate that you're working, obviously, with different lighting combinations here, so where we're able to get the sort of warmness on the bone and then a coolness in the background. This is exactly what we were hoping to find, these color combinations where you have warm versus the cool. These are the kinds of things that I wanted you to be able to discover within the temperature experiment. Really, these experiments were meant to kind of introduce you to some things and get you to recognize the controls on your camera, but also the result of those controls visually as you're working through them. So far, I mean, these are really good. I mean, I hope you're happy with what you achieved in these images. I've been doing this project for, gosh, a long time, since I think 2012 is when I first started teaching this particular class. So, and I have to say, this is probably one of the best versions I've seen. So, congratulations. I mean, you've really done a nice job in collecting this one. So I'll probably be keeping this series, if you don't mind, because you've done an excellent, meaning keeping them to show others the possibilities, because I'm really very proud of what what you've done here. Here we're moving into now the contrast, where we're using reflectors. Reflection is a lot different than intensity, where you're adding a light. Reflection is where you're recapturing the key light and redirecting it back in. Now you're not having to deal with that sort of extra shadow line. You're not having to deal with the butterfly effect that you end up getting. There's so many advantages to using reflection over adding another light. Adding another light adds more luminosity and more brightness, yes, but it adds other sort of challenges at the same time, whereas the reflection and it really does sort of benefit you in a lot of other ways, and you can be much more subtle in the solutions to it. Silverware, where you have high reflections, is also going to be a very difficult thing to work with, because you have these real bright specular highlights. So it's helpful to only have the one light source and then using a soft reflector to kind of bounce it back in. You probably, after the project was over with and you got to the hardness part of it, where you were using diffusers, started to notice that the soft reflector that you used in the contrast, where you have the white card with the lights bouncing off of it, is effectively a diffused light source now, because it's soft. It's not a hard source. It's not creating that harshness. It's creating a scattered light source. So you're basically adding a diffused fill to what you're doing. So it's kind of like this illusion of an extra light source. Using a lot of diagonals in these, which is what's giving you a lot of energy. There's a ton of energy in this image here, because there's a lot of angles, diagonals, that type of thing that's happening. I don't know. It looks like you're having some fun here. It looks like you're really kind of exploring shape, exploring pattern, exploring the rhythm that you can sort of find when you start to get into the kind of details, and when you become not concerned about the subject itself. You start to work with the shapes, the possibilities really start to open up. An image like this, this is exactly what we're talking about when we say, let's move beyond subject. Let's talk about the qualities of light, how we can use those qualities of light to create an emotive quality. And suddenly this is not utensils. This is a combination of lighting, shadows, reflections, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Very nice. So let's move into the last one, which is the hardness, which is where you really are sort of, hopefully, and this was the last images that that I was looking at. This is where you're getting into the diffused light source. This is where it should all be starting to come together. You're using the direction, you're using multiple light sources, you're diffusing some of those light sources. This is where your experience from all the other four should be starting to come into it. At this point, the subjects should be totally facile to you. You've worked with them so long, over and over and over. You're hopefully not seeing them as vessels anymore. Clearly, you were able to get beyond that very quickly. But the idea is, at this point, you've made so many images of these objects that you're now looking for other ways to use it. Again, this little stuff right in here, you probably didn't even see it. This would be something that we would use later on to sort of correct compositionally to make sure we didn't get those little things up there. Stuff like this, I mean, intuitively, these are just good choices. I have no other feedback other than, where do you go from here in compositionally? You really don't go anywhere other than just you continue to push forward in the abstraction. You continue to look for various ways to push the envelope of light and dark, and you start to look for more challenging subject matter to push in this way. I would say the more how shall I say, nonsensical and the more or the less interesting the subject is, the more challenging it will be to give a motive quality to it. I once challenged myself to see if I couldn't make photographs of a paper bag and give it give it an emotive quality. I'm talking about a brown paper bag, lunch bag, and I worked with that for a few months to see what I could do to make those paper bags feel like they had some energy and some quality to them. That's what I'm talking about when I say, just continue to move forward. Subject really doesn't matter once you have a handle of what the real medium is with photography. It's not the objects, it's the thing that you're using is light. So excellent, excellent project here. I would just have to say that I'm going to be following what you're doing. I'm going to be looking at ways in which I can push you a little bit farther technique wise, and please don't hesitate to ask me some questions so that you can feel even more challenged if the projects, maybe you're coming to this with a little bit of experience, and I want to be sure that the level of challenge is meeting your expectations, because even though this is a 200 level class, a lot of students are coming to the class with a variety of different experience levels, and the projects are really meant to be built in to challenge students at a variety of levels. So what I would say is that regardless of where you are, that you do want to kind of self-challenge yourself to kind of raise the level each time. And it looks like you were challenging yourself to make images not just of technical quality and following the instructions, but you were really looking to make images that had an aesthetic quality that were close to your visual voice. And I see that in those images. So excellent job, and I look forward to seeing more images on the blog. All right, bye now.